My name is Jenna Carter, and I'm 32 years old now. This story starts when I was 19, but the damage began long before that. People love the idea of twins. They imagine matching outfits, shared secrets, built in best friends. What they don't talk about is what happens when parents choose one child and quietly discard the other. I had a twin brother identical in every way that mattered to strangers, but completely different in the eyes of our parents. My brother Grant was their miracle, their pride, their proof that they'd done something right. I was the afterthought, the explanation, the problem that always needed fixing. Growing up, it was never subtle. Grant could do no wrong. If something broke, I'd hear my name before anyone even asked what happened. If money went missing, my parents didn't search his room, they came straight to mine. I learned early that defending myself only made things worse. Silence was safer. Compliance was survival. I worked harder, studied longer, stayed out of trouble. I went to trade school trained to become an electrician, worked part-time at a hardware store to cover my own expenses. Grant, meanwhile, was studying business on my parents' dime, though mostly he studied parties girls and how far he could push the rules without consequences. By October 2012, I was exhausted but hopeful. 19 years old, independent in spirit, if not yet in reality. I'd worked a full shift and came home ready to sleep. Grant wasn't there, which meant nothing. He rarely was. I fell asleep on the couch around 11. I woke up to flashlights in my face. 3 police officers stood over me, guns drawn, shouting commands I barely understood. I was yanked upright, handcuffed, before my feet even touched the floor. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. They didn't explain, they didn't comfort, they didn't listen. A pharmacy 2 miles away had been robbed, the clerk beaten, prescription pills stolen, and the mask, the hoodie, the drugs. Everything was found in the trunk of my car. The car I never lent to anyone. The car parked in the driveway. The car my parents never questioned Grant about. When my parents arrived at the station, I expected confusion, fear, maybe even doubt. Instead, my mother spoke like she'd been rehearsing. Yes, I'd been acting strange. Yes, I had money problems. Yes, I'd been secretive. My father nodded along, telling the detective that Grant was responsible, steady, reliable, and that I'd always been the difficult one. I sat there listening to my own parents bury me alive with their words. Grant had an alibi. He was at his ex-girlfriend's house all night. She confirmed it. Her parents confirmed it. Time-stamped messages confirmed it. I had nothing. Just silence. And a family that chose him again. That night, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just being arrested. I was being replaced. The interrogation room smelled like old coffee and disinfectant, the kind of room designed to make time stretch and confidence rot. I sat there for hours, hands cuffed to the table, answering the same questions again and again, while the detectives rotated in and out like it was a shift change. Where were you between 10 and midnight? Why were the pills in your trunk? Why didn't your parents trust you? That last one wasn't asked out loud, but it hung in the air like a verdict already decided. I told them the truth until my throat was raw. I'd worked until 10. The hardware store logs proved it. I came straight home. I fell asleep on the couch. Grant wasn't home. He could have taken my car while I was asleep. He'd done things like that before. Smaller things, petty things, testing how much he could get away with. They didn't write any of that down. What they did write down were my parents' statements. My mother said I'd been distant lately, that I'd been stressed about money, that she worried I was falling in with the wrong people. She said it with that tight, concerned smile she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable while quietly condemning me. My father backed her up, said he didn't want to believe I'd do something like this, but if he was being honest, he wasn't shocked. Said Grant had always been the dependable one. Said I'd always had a temper. I watched the detective's pen move faster every time they spoke. Grant arrived later, eyes red, voice shaking. He sat across from me for just a moment before they pulled him away. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Not once. I remember thinking that if he looked at me, really looked at me, this whole thing might fall apart. He never did. The charges came fast. Armed robbery, assault, possession of stolen property. I didn't even fully understand what that meant, yet only that the words sounded heavy enough to crush whatever future I'd been building. My public defender was honest in a way that felt cruel but wasn't. He told me the evidence was bad. Not airtight, but bad enough. Stolen goods in my car. Parents willing to testify that I had motive. A victim who couldn't identify the attacker, but whose description fit me perfectly. You don't have much to work with, he said gently. Juries believe parents. The trial felt less like a search for truth and more like a performance where everyone already knew their lines. My parents took the stand for the prosecution. I still don't have words for what that felt like. Watching my mother swear to tell the truth and then calmly explain why her own daughter was capable of violence. Listening to my father describe me as troubled, unreliable someone who needed tough love. Grant sat in the gallery's shoulders, shaking, wiping tears like a grieving brother betrayed by blood. The jury watched him like he was a victim too. When I testified, I could feel how thin my voice sounded compared to theirs, how small, how desperate. The verdict came back guilty. 7 years. The judge said he was being lenient because I was young, because I had no prior record, because this was supposedly a mistake I could recover from. 7 years felt like a death sentence dressed up as mercy. As they led me away, I looked back once. My parents didn't look at me. Grant was already being hugged. That was the moment I understood something clearly, painfully, and forever. I wasn't just convicted by a court. I was abandoned by my family. Prison doesn't feel real at first. It feels like a mistake that's about to be corrected. Like someone will walk and shuffle papers and say there's been a mix-up. That doesn't happen. What happens instead is steel doors counts at dawn and the slow realization that no one is coming. I was 19, small-framed and terrified in ways I didn't yet know how to name. The first few weeks were pure survival. Don't stare, don't react, don't cry where anyone can see you. I learned the rhythm fast. Wake-up counts meals that barely tasted like food, the way time moved, in thick, suffocating blocks. The worst part wasn't the noise or the fights or the constant tension humming under everything. It was waking up every morning and remembering that I didn't belong there. That my life had been stolen not by a stranger, but by my own blood. I got lucky with my job assignment. The prison library. Quiet, predictable, a place where nobody asked questions as long as you shelved books and kept your head down. The librarian, Mr. Patterson, noticed how much time I spent reading. At first, it was anything novels, manuals, outdated textbooks. Then he started leaving law books on my cart. Criminal procedure, evidence rules, case law. I didn't tell him why I wanted them. I didn't have to. I read until my eyes burned, took notes on scraps of paper I hid in my cell. Knowledge became the only thing they couldn't take from me. I wrote letters home every week for the first year. Long ones, careful ones, angry ones, I explained. I begged. I laid out every reason Grant had done this. Every memory of him setting me up as kids, every pattern my parents refused to see. They never wrote back. Not once. Grant never visited, never called, never sent a letter pretending to feel bad. After a while, the silence changed shape. It wasn't shocking anymore. It was confirmation. 8 months in, someone finally came. My Uncle Ron, my mother's younger brother. He sat across from me in the visiting room, hands folded, eyes steady. He didn't rush me. He let me talk until my voice cracked and then waited while I pulled myself back together. When I finished, he said, "I believe you." Those 3 words hit harder than the sentence ever had. He told me my parents had always favored Grant, that he'd argued with them about it for years, that he wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it right. He visited when he could, put money on my commissary account, brought me news from the outside. More importantly, he listened. He also paid attention. Grant, it turned out, was doing well, suspiciously well. He dropped out of college and suddenly had a business, a truck, an apartment. My parents were proud. They bragged about him like he was proof they'd been right all along. Uncle Ron didn't buy it. He started keeping notes. I spent 5 years inside, 5 birthdays in a cell, 5 years watching the world move on without me. When I finally stopped writing letters, it wasn't because I'd forgiven anyone. It was because I understood something vital. If the truth was ever going to come out, it wouldn't be because my family wanted it to. It would be because I forced it into the light myself. I walked out of prison in 2017 with everything I owned in a clear plastic bag and a felony stamped onto my name like a warning label. I was 24, technically free, and completely unanchored. No parents waiting, no welcome home, just Uncle Ron's car idling at the curb, and the kind of hug you give someone you're afraid might disappear if you let go. He'd set up his spare room for me. Clean sheets, clothes in my size, basic things that felt unreal after 5 years of concrete and steel. I stood under hot water for almost 2 hours that first night, letting it burn my skin just to remind myself I was still alive. The next morning I went to work. Uncle Ron had lined up a job with a man named Bill who ran a small electrical company. Bill didn't ask many questions. He didn't look at me like I was broken. He just showed me where the tools were and put me to work. Physical labor became therapy. I worked until my hands ached and my muscles screamed. 60-hour weeks, sometimes more. I saved every dollar. Bill noticed. After a few months, he started teaching me things that had nothing to do with wiring bidding jobs, reading contracts, dealing with inspectors. He told me something one night that stuck. He said people don't listen to ex-cons with nothing to lose, but they do listen to people who've built something worth protecting. That idea became my blueprint. While I was rebuilding my body and my bank account, Uncle Ron kept watching Grant. The timeline never made sense. The pills from the pharmacy had never been recovered. About $15,000 worth gone without explanation. Grant had used that money to launch his life while I'd been buried. I hired a lawyer not to reopen the case yet, but to understand the path. She told me the truth was possible, but it would take new evidence. Solid evidence. A confession would be ideal, but rare. So I built patience instead. By 2019, I had my license, my own small electrical business, one helper, then two. My name slowly became something people trusted, and quietly, deliberately, I started funding an investigation. A private investigator, former cop, thorough, expensive, worth every penny. While my business grew, Grant's life started to crack. His operation collapsed. He moved back in with our parents, but he still had money. New electronics, cash deals, things that didn't line up with his story. We documented everything. I stayed invisible. I worked out, changed my appearance, gained muscle, cut my hair, grew confidence the hard way. I wasn't the 19-year-old girl he remembered. And when the investigator finally said the words I'd been waiting for, that Grant was talking, bragging sloppy, I knew it was time. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was setting a trap. By the time I was ready to make contact, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The girl who'd gone to prison at 19 had been cautious, quiet, easy to overlook. The woman staring back at me now was built differently physically, mentally, emotionally. 3 years of hard labor, structured workouts, and relentless discipline had reshaped everything. I carried myself differently. I spoke differently. Even my silences landed with weight. That mattered. The private investigator walked me through the plan one last time. Fake identity, burner phone, clean digital footprint, a backstory solid enough to survive casual scrutiny. I memorized every detail: where I grew up, what kind of business I was starting, why I needed bulk electronics under the table. We practiced conversations until they felt natural, until I could hear Grant bragging and not react. That was the hardest part. The first message went out late on a Tuesday night. Casual, curious. I told him I'd heard he could source electronics in volume and that I was looking to scale fast. He responded within minutes, confident, eager, always hungry for the next quick win. We exchanged messages for days, built rapport. I let him feel smart, let him feel in control. We met at a diner just outside town. I arrived early, chose a booth with my back to the wall, and waited. When he walked in, my stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. He looked older, softer, still wearing that same smug expression, like the world owed him something. He didn't recognize me. That almost broke me. We shook hands. Weak grip. I smiled, sat down, and let him talk. He loved that part. Loved explaining how he sourced his inventory, how he moved product, how he stayed ahead of everyone else. I asked questions that made him feel impressive without sounding suspicious. After 20 minutes, I nudged the conversation, asked how he got started. He leaned back, smirked, and said sometimes you have to create your own opportunities. Said he'd pulled off a big score years ago that gave him his initial capital. I nodded impressed, leaned in just enough. He told me he'd robbed a pharmacy. Then he laughed. Said it had been perfect. Said his twin sister had taken the fall. Said nobody could tell them apart, and our parents had backed him without hesitation. Said he'd used the stolen pills to fund his first business and never looked back. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. My hands were steady only because I'd trained them to be. I asked questions, gentle ones, curious ones. He answered all of them. How he took my car, how he planted the evidence, how he coached his ex-girlfriend on what to say, how easy it had been. He laughed about my prison sentence like it was a punchline. When I asked if he ever felt bad, he shrugged. Said I would have ended up in prison eventually anyway. We talked for almost an hour. I got every detail, every admission, every cruel justification. The recording device hidden in my clothing captured it all. When we finally stood to leave, he gave me his number and told me to call any time. I walked out, got in my truck, drove 2 blocks, and had to pull over because my hands were shaking too badly to drive. The investigator was parked nearby. I handed him the recorder. He listened in silence. When it ended, he looked at me and said, "We got him." And for the first time in a decade, I let myself breathe. The moment the recording existed, my life went into suspension. We didn't rush. That was the first rule. Truth only matters if it survives scrutiny. The investigator duplicated the file, logged the chain of custody, and handed it directly to my lawyer. Not the public defender from years ago, a specialist. Someone who built her reputation, tearing apart wrongful convictions piece by piece. She listened to the recording 3 times. Then she went quiet. Finally, she said, "This is enough, but only if we do everything right." Audio experts authenticated the file. Forensics confirmed there were no edits. Grant's voice matched previous recordings from court transcripts and police interviews. His ex-girlfriend tracked down and offered immunity, finally told the truth. She admitted Grant had shown up at her place after midnight, not before 10. Admitted he'd pressured her to lie. Admitted she'd been scared and young and stupid. In December 2019, we filed the motion to vacate my conviction. The district attorney's office pushed back immediately. They didn't like admitting mistakes, especially not ones that sent an innocent woman to prison for 5 years. They questioned our methods, suggested entrapment, tried to imply I was obsessed, vengeful, unstable. My lawyer shut that down fast. Everything had been legal. One-party consent, no coercion, no threats, just Grant talking freely, confidently, proudly. 8 months of hearings followed, 8 months of waiting while my life hovered in limbo. My business kept running, but my focus splintered. Every unknown number made my chest tighten. Every envelope from the courthouse made my hands sweat. Then in June 2020, Grant was arrested. Uncle Ron was there when it happened. He watched from across the street as police pulled up to my parents' house at dawn. Neighbors came out. Phones lifted. Grant was walked out in handcuffs while my mother screamed and my father argued with officers who weren't listening. The golden child exposed. In August 2020, my conviction was officially vacated. I stood in a courtroom again, this time free, while a judge declared me innocent. Said the state acknowledged the injustice. Said my record would be cleared. My knees almost gave out. Uncle Ron cried openly in the gallery. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder like she was holding me upright. The news ran the story for days. Former inmate exonerated after twin brother confesses. My parents didn't call. Not once. They hired Grant, the best lawyer money could buy. Paid for his defense. Stood by him exactly the way they'd stood against me. Denied the recording. Claimed manipulation. Refused to accept reality. In January 2021, the jury convicted him on all counts. It took 4 hours. He was sentenced to 12 years. And somehow, even then, my parents still chose him. Grant's sentencing should have felt like closure. 12 years. Guilty on every count. The same courtroom where my life had been dismantled, finally acknowledging the truth. Instead, it felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm, quiet, wrecked, and heavy with things that could never be rebuilt. I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I hadn't planned to speak. I'd rehearsed 100 speeches in my head over the years, but standing there looking at him, I realized I didn't need theatrics. I just needed honesty. I told the court what prison does to a 19-year-old girl who's never thrown a punch in her life. I talked about the fear, the nights spent awake listening for trouble, the birthdays that passed inside concrete walls. I talked about watching my 20s disappear while he built a life with stolen money. I talked about the letters I wrote that were never answered about Uncle Ron being the only family member who ever showed up. Grant didn't look at me. He stared at the table like it might swallow him whole. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, his lawyer advised against it. Probably the smartest decision Grant had ever made. My parents were there, sitting behind him, supporting him, again. After sentencing, their lives unraveled fast. Uncle Ron kept me updated not out of malice, but because I deserved to know the truth the way they never let me have it. They drained their retirement accounts to pay Grant's legal fees, took out a second mortgage on the house, borrowed money from relatives who quietly stopped returning their calls once the full story came out. The family grapevine had finally caught up to them. Meanwhile, my life stabilized in ways I never thought possible. My business expanded. 3 employees, steady contracts, a reputation built on showing up and doing the job right. I started dating Ethan, a project manager I met on a job site. He knew my entire story before our 3rd date and didn't flinch. Said surviving something like that didn't make me broken, it made me resilient. We took things slow, normal, safe, something I'd never had before. My parents didn't reach out when my conviction was vacated. They didn't call after Grant was sentenced. For a brief stupid moment, I wondered if they ever would. 3 months later, I came home from work and found my mother sitting on my porch. She looked smaller, frail, like the years had finally caught up to her. When she saw me, she stood up and started crying before I'd said a word. Apologized, said she should have believed me, said she'd made a terrible mistake. Then she asked for help, said my father's health was failing, said they were about to lose the house, said they had no one else, said I was doing well now and could spare something for family. Family. I let her talk, let her empty herself of excuses and regret. When she finished, I asked her one question. When did you realize it was Grant? She couldn't answer. That was all I needed. I told her I could help, but I wouldn't, because she'd already made her choice and so had I. I gave her 1 minute to leave my property before I called the police. She left crying, saying I'd regret this. I didn't. My mother didn't stop trying after that day on my porch. She called 47 times in 2 weeks. Left voicemails that followed the same script, crying, apologizing, reminding me that my father was sick, that they were desperate, that family was supposed to take care of each other. I listened to the first few. After that, I stopped pressing play. I blocked her number. Then my father started calling from his phone. Same pleas, same guilt, same refusal to acknowledge what they'd actually done. I blocked him too. When the blocked numbers stopped working, they tried new ones. Random area codes, burner phones. I blocked those as well. Uncle Ron told me they called him next. Asked him to convince me. He told them he was done, that they'd made their bed years ago and now had to lie in it. He blocked them too. A month later, they escalated. I was working a commercial renovation downtown, up on a ladder running wire, when the site foreman came over and said there was an older couple at the entrance asking for me. He said they looked upset. I already knew who it was. They stood near the security desk when I walked out. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him, thin, hunched, exhausted. My mother's hands shook as she reached for me. He started talking immediately, about misunderstandings, about forgiveness, about how he was my father and deserved to be heard. I didn't respond. I turned to the foreman and said calmly, "These people are trespassing. Please have security remove them." My father raised his voice. My mother cried. Construction workers slowed, watching. Security arrived within minutes. They were given a choice leave or have the police called. They left. My mother looked back once, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. They sent letters after that. I recognized the handwriting and burned them unopened. Watched the paper curl and blacken in my fireplace until there was nothing left but ash. 6 months later, Uncle Ron told me they'd lost the house. Foreclosure. They moved into a 1-bedroom apartment across town. My father still worked at 68 because they had no savings left. My mother's health was deteriorating, and they struggled to afford her medication. Grant tried writing to me from prison. I recognized the return address and sent it back unopened. By then, I owned my own home. 3 bedrooms, a quiet neighborhood, a garage big enough for a workshop. My business was stable, growing. Ethan and I had built something solid, no drama, no fear, no conditions. Sometimes people ask if I feel guilty. I don't. I spent 5 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit because my parents chose the wrong child and never questioned themselves. I rebuilt my life without them. I healed without them. And I learned something most people never do. Forgiveness is optional. Access is earned. And sometimes the most powerful closure is a door that never opens again.